Soviet citizens firmly knew that there were no and could not be gangsters in the USSR. Which means there are no bank robberies. Sometimes some renegades raided savings banks, but they were quickly and efficiently detained by police officers. Even seasoned criminals did not think about robbing the state bank's cash vaults, and yet in 1977 the unthinkable happened. The attackers encroached on the holy of holies of the Soviet financial system. Cousins Nikolai and Felix Kalachyan were very different. In 4th grade, Nikolai ran away from home, where his exhausted mother was spending her last money on treating his father, who was dying of cancer. The boy huddled close to a gypsy camp, where he traded drugs and then worked as a garbage man. As a result, Nikolai Kalachyan's entire education was limited to elementary school and the later acquired profession of a turner. Gathering a group of peers, Kalachyan incited them to rob a savings bank. This was done in a rather original way. The perpetrators entered the premises after hours by making a hole in the wall. They managed to steal several thousand rubles, but the police were unable to find the perpetrators. Nikolai quickly spent the money he received in restaurants and decided for himself that he would no longer work for pennies. New criminal plans began to emerge in his head, but Nikolai's former accomplices were not satisfied. He needed a person who was physically strong, capable of doing what others could not do. This person turned out to be his cousin Felix Kalachyan. Felix didn't look like a relative at all. The modest, hard-working guy did not even think about the criminal path. He married early, had 2 children and lived with his family in Leninakon. But despite all Felix's efforts, there was not enough money for a normal existence. From time to time he went to work in Yerevan, where one day he invited Nikolai for a serious conversation. He knew that nature generously endowed Felix with physical abilities. He was extremely strong and flexible. Some of the tricks that Felix Kalachyan performed with ease were beyond the power of even circus performers. Sometimes, on a dare, he could hang with one hand for more than an hour. Nikolai Kalachyan really needed such qualities of his brother. At first, Felix rejected with horror offers to engage in thefts. But Nikolai knew what to push. "Don't you want your family to get out of poverty?" Hearing this argument, Felix Kalachyan agreed. The first case of the family criminal duo was the robbery of a department store. Nikolai was the brains of the operation, and Felix was the executor. Having dismantled the wall, he stole scarce tape recorders from the store. They took out the loot on a cart. Despite the fact that the goods were sold cheaply, they managed to earn 15,000 rubles. At that time, for this money you could buy 2 Lada cars at the Ghost price. But the most surprising thing was that no one was going to look for the thieves. The store was operating as usual and no one said anything about the grand theft. Nikolai Kalachyan realized that the stolen tape recorders were stolen and the store director was afraid that if the case was made public, not only the thieves, but himself would go to jail. Felix Kalachyan was happy. What his brother promised him came true. He sent part of the family's money to Leninakon, and he and his brother went on a spree to Moscow. The luxurious life consumed the money very quickly, and soon Nikolai began to think about a larger matter. He decided to rob the state bank a little. A modern cash vault of a state bank of an impregnable fortress, with dozens of levels of protection up to seismic sensors. There was nothing like this in the USSR, because it was believed that there was no need for it. Of course, there was police guard in the building of the State Bank of the Armenian SSR in Yerevan. However, as it turned out, it could be bypassed. Nikolai Kalachyan dedicated Zavan Bagdasaryan to the details of how the security system is structured and where the money is stored. The Komsomol activist, who is characterized in all respects as positive, apparently lost his mind after visiting the bank vault, where he was admitted as a member of the banknote counting commission. As Bagdasaryan says, the vault simultaneously contained banknotes worth up to 100 million Soviet rubles. Contemplating this unimaginable mountain of money with a salary of 85 rubles a month turned out to be beyond Bagdasaryan's mental strength. and he began to think about stealing. On this basis, he became friends with Nikolai Kalachyan. The money vault in the state bank was located on the second floor, where in a room without windows, banknotes lay laid out on ordinary shelves. It was considered unnecessary to use safes for this. But how to get into this room? It turned out that directly above it there is a staff rest room. And adjacent to the wall of the State Bank building is a residential building, which has a common wall with the bank at the level of one floor. Nikolai Kalachyan developed the robbery plan for several months, thinking through everything down to the smallest detail. Felix, who was traditionally assigned the role of executor, was supposed to enter the building on Friday so that the attackers would have as much time as possible before the theft was discovered. It was assumed that Felix would first break through the common wall of the buildings. He will get inside, then break through the floor in the break room, go down to the storage room and take away the maximum possible amount of money from there. Nikolai Kalachyan even added a bottle of water to his brother's arsenal, believing that from the hard work Felix would have a strong thirst that needed to be quenched. In addition, an umbrella was included in the thieves' arsenal. Having made a hole in the vault, Felix had to push the umbrella through and open it, so that pieces of cement fall on it without creating noise or attracting the attention of security. A week before the scheduled date of the robbery, Nikolai Kalachyan had an accident in a taxi and ended up in the hospital. However, he told his brother that the matter must be completed. On the evening of August 5, 1977, Felix Kalachyan went on business. Having climbed to the attic of the building next to the State Bank, he began to break through the wall. But here the matter almost ended in failure. It turned out that the wall was extremely thick, and Felix does not have enough strength or time to break through it. He began to look for another way of entry. Having climbed to the roof, Felix saw that the windows in this very rest room were not closed, but covered with plastic film. They started renovations there. Theoretically, it was possible to jump out of the window from the roof, but in practice such a trick was deadly. Nevertheless, Felix took the plunge and achieved success. Once in the treasured room, he began to break through the floor. Here everything turned out as Nikolai intended. Having made a hole in the floor with a diameter of 34 centimeters and securing the rope, Felix Kalachyan went down to the storage room. Where did he come from with more than 30 kilograms of money? Later, investigators refused to believe in such a possibility. However, in an investigative experiment, Felix showed how he crawled into the bank and climbed back out. Although the second time he did it much worse than the first. Having got out of the bank with a backpack of money already in the morning, Felix went to the hospital to see his brother. From there they went together to a rented apartment, where they temporarily hid their loot in a cache. On Monday morning, when the theft was discovered, it became truly black for the employees of the State Bank of the Armenian SSR. More than 1.5 million rubles were missing. This is a cosmic sum by the standards of the Soviet Union. In dollar equivalent at the exchange rate at that time, it was about $2 million. The theft was placed under special control by the top leadership of the USSR. Leonid Brezhnev was personally reported on the progress of the investigation. However, in the first days there was not much to report. Members of the investigation team said that at first they didn't even know where to start searching. The total shake-up of the criminal world of Armenia did not bring results. The crime bosses themselves went to the police, declaring that no one in their circle was capable of such insolence. This was also explained by the fact that the theft of socialist property was considered in the USSR as a more serious crime than the theft of private property. For raids on savings banks and similar actions, where tens of thousands of rubles appeared as loot. The death penalty was on the horizon, but in this case the amount involved was many times greater. Still, the detectives had one clue. Most of the stolen amount consisted of old ruble banknotes of the AI series. 100 ruble notes, this series was just introduced into circulation. They have not yet managed to disperse throughout the country. To get on the trail of the kidnappers, By personal order of Brezhnev, the circulation of banknotes in this series was frozen throughout the USSR. They were left in banks indefinitely. Thus, the appearance of the Starublovka series AI, anywhere, would expose the criminals. Nikolai Kalachyan, who demanded that his brother take mostly old rubles, quickly realized his mistake. Therefore, at first the attackers spent bills of smaller denominations, and then Nikolai came up with a way to legalize capital. To do this, it was planned to use them to buy bonds of a 3% government loan, which could then be sold again to get pure rubles. It was impossible for Kalach to cope with this task alone, and they were seriously afraid of exposure. On one of his trips to Moscow, Nikolai met Ludmila Oksanova. He turned the girl's head, promised to marry her and completely subordinated her to his influence. Ludmila knew that the groom had a lot of money, but she was not aware of the origin of the capital. Nikolai explained that he managed to win a very large amount of money, but since gambling is not welcomed in the USSR, it needs to be legalized. Ludmila introduced Nikolai and Felix to her brother Vladimir Kuznetsov, who worked as a taxi driver. Nikolai told Vladimir that he wanted to have a magnificent wedding with his sister. Why is it necessary to buy 3% loan bonds? The criminal managed to exchange about 100,000 rubles and turn them into loan bonds in Tashkent. In the capital of Uzbekistan, the warning about the AI series Starublovkas was treated quite carelessly. Therefore, when the operatives arrived in the city, there was already no trace of the attackers. Vladimir Kuznetsov bought bonds in Moscow. At first he took 1 and 2 bonds, but then decided to snatch 6,000 rubles at once in money from a series already known to everyone. But the Sperkasha employee only had bonds worth 3,000 rubles. Having asked the client to wait, she went to the vault to get the missing securities, where she lingered for several minutes. And then Kuznetsov lost his nerve. Leaving 3,000 rubles in Sperkas, he ran away. This incident naturally attracted the attention of operatives. Unfortunately for the criminals, the girl from the savings bank had an excellent visual memory and compiled an exact sketch of Kuznetsov. Meanwhile, Nikolai Kalachyan, sensing that something was wrong, was planning to move from Moscow to Sochi. For this purpose, a car was purchased at the market in the South Port for 13,000 rubles. In the spare wheel of which there was a hiding place for stolen money that had not yet been legalized. Kalachyan was planning to escape only with his brother. The bride was becoming a burden for him and he intended to break up with her. These plans could not be implemented. Operatives established the identity of Vladimir Kuznetsov, his place of work and home address. Following this, they learned that Vladimir's sister had a wealthy lover from Armenia. On the night of June 6 to 7, 1978, brothers Kalachyan and Vladimir Kuznetsov were arrested. At the trial, the brothers had different attitudes. Despite his difficult childhood, the cynical Nikola did not evoke sympathy. He used people too openly, many of whom he ruined the lives of. Everything is different with Felix, a modest family man who embarked on a criminal path under the influence of his brother and the desire to help his loved ones. While in the pre-trial detention center and realizing what awaited him, Felix wrote a letter to his wife asking her to forgive him. He asked for one thing, to raise his children as worthy people. The court's verdict was expected. Nikolai and Felix, Kalachyan, were sentenced to death. The chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Council of the Armenian SSR, Babkan Sarkisov, tried to save the brothers. He wrote an appeal to the Supreme Council of the USSR asking for a pardon. Sarkisov emphasized the youth of the criminals, both were under 30 years old, and the fact that they did not kill or maim anyone. And the fact that Felix Kalachyan has young children. The Supreme Council of the USSR granted the petition for pardon, but the relevant documents from Moscow arrived a day later than they should have, and the sentence was carried out.